LFA design here, Roski. We have Francis Anderton. I'll give a brief intro, very brief. I'm very good at brief intros. Not good at long, extended intros, but I met Francis, we figure, in the early 90s, when you came from the UK.
Oh, from the UK.
Okay,
Yeah.
from the UK. And she's been a colleague, a supporter, a friend, and an inspiration for a long time. And I think among the many things I could say about Frances is that, and she was, of course, the host of DNA, Design and Architecture program, for a zillion years. And I could say that besides all of her talents in writing and curating and speaking and really being kind of in touch with, on the pulse of culture, that I learned so much. And I like to learn stuff. And I always felt like even if I didn't hear the program on the day it was, which was like a Tuesday or Thursday, right?
Tuesday, yeah.
You could always get the podcasts. And I learned so much about our town and about architecture and design from Frances. And I really value that as one of the most incredible things and contributions to our city and beyond. And so I will introduce Wen Chow, who's a student of ours in MFA design, and he will give you the official factual information.
Francis Anderton covers Los Angeles design and architecture in print, podcasts, and public events. She's currently writing a book, Common Ground, Multifamily Housing in Los Angeles, to be published in 2022 by Angel City Press. Anderton also programs talk, exhibitions, and events at Helm Bakery District. For many years, she hosted KCRW's DNA, Design and Architecture radio show. Having got her start at KCRW producing one only current affairs shows, Which Way LA, and to the point, she produced and co-hosted the radio series Wasted, Needs Solution of Dirty Problem of Waste, aired in early 2021 on KCRW's Greater LA. In 2015, she curated Sink or Swim, Design for a Sea Change, an exhibition of photography about resilient architecture shown at the Annabelle Space of Photography. She has written widely about design for publications, include the New York Times and Dwell magazine. Honors include the 2020 Icon Award from the Los Angeles Design Festival and the 2010 Easter McCrary Award for her work in educating the public about architecture and urbanism, bestowed by the Architectural Guild of USC School of Architecture.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And note to self, make sure to edit one's own bio before sending it out. I'm sorry you had to listen through all of that. But thank you so much for the very kind introduction. I really appreciate it. Now, April, who has been an absolute friend and inspiration to me, she mentioned that I've been doing I hosted DNA on KCW for zillions of years, and zillions is about the number. I'm definitely getting up there. And one of the things that happens when you get older, it's not all bad, you actually start to sort of take stock of things that you've learned over your life, and you start to sort of formulate kind of a sort of perhaps acquire some clarity about sort of what matters to you. And that's indeed a bit of a process that I'm going through right now. I did leave my staff position at KCW a couple of years back. I do sometimes still contribute, but what I'm using this time very much to do is actually sort of think more deeply, I guess, about fewer design and architecture topics, whereas I used to do sort of a story every week. I'd pound these stories out. And it's great to be able to stop and think. And one of the things that I'm definitely stopping and thinking about is multifamily housing, which you very kindly referred to, the book that I'm working. But the other thing that I'm thinking about a lot actually really has come out of the series that was mentioned, that was the last big project I did for KCRW, and the series is called Wasted. And that series, or the production of that series, has sort of fed into sort of thinking subsequently around architecture, sustainability, design. And that's what's going to be the topic for tonight. If you see me wandering off topic, wave. If you see me going on too long, do make that kind of sign, like we've heard enough now. But with that said, here is my topic, radical retrofits. I hope you like the name. And it brings together ideas about architecture and sustainability in ways that I hope are very relevant to, not just to architecture, but to design generally and to art today. So here we go, let's start. So I just want you all to know, all of you design students in this room that are looking to be artists, designers, maybe architects, interior designers, whatever you are planning to do. I just want to say that it was conversations with some of your peers that really got me thinking about the topic for tonight. And again, as I mentioned, I produced a series called Wasted. This was the series. I have my friend Julie Brow sitting right here, who was an incredible consultant on the series. And Wasted looked at waste, basically, obviously, but specifically in California, and ways in which people were trying to, and often quite effectively, innovating around how to deal with e-waste, fast fashion, food waste, construction waste, where there's a lot of waste, and packaging waste. And in the course of working on this series, I did talk to a number of young people who are looking to be designers. And one of the things that was quite extraordinary, actually, was some reactions that I got. As mentioned, that I came across a lot of creativity, including artistic creativity, like these stereos that the boys at Homeboy Recycling were turning into sculpture. I just put them in because they were fun. But what I heard from a number of students who are in the realm of design was a deep sense of climate grief. And how that climate grief was expressed was people would say to me that they were actually despondent about becoming designers, that they felt that to be a designer was in itself to contribute to the sustainability crisis, the climate crisis that we currently confront. And this was not all the students, but it was definitely quite a number, and I was truly surprised because I went to architecture school in the early 1980s, and any of us who are in this room who are in that age range can maybe remember that this was a time when, for designers, it was kind of really, really exciting, and there was definitely a sense that design was a problem solver in a very positive way and really had something to offer, and moreover was something that was now being democratized. This image is from IKEA in the actually when it kicked off in Sweden in the 1950s, but we started to hear these terms in the 1980s, like democratic design, the notion that you could have good taste and it could proliferate and it could reach everybody, and it wasn't something that was exclusive. You had to go to special showrooms and have a special, have a well-heeled client that could pay for design. Now design was available to everybody, and Philippe Starck was a big figure in France who wound up, selling his stuff at Target. We all laughed about calling it Target, but this was because Target became one of these purveyors of sort of democratized good taste. So this was going on. And then meanwhile, in that same decade, and then again in the early 90s, I first visited and then I moved to Los Angeles. And here in LA, I just found this incredible excitement about design. So I saw buildings like this, Frank Gehry's seminal house from the 1970s, Edgemar in Santa Monica, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Princeton Dance. You may have seen that in Koreatown. It's hanging on. It was we all found it very amusing when it opened. The Regis House by Mike Rotundi, who is sitting right here and who is the husband of April. That was a defining project of my era when I moved here. So anyway, flash to Old Georgian City in the UK, and this picture is where I grew up, and I have put this picture in to demonstrate why I was excited by LA, because Bath is, as I say, a neoclassical city. It has sort of Roman remains. It's quite lovely. It's also quite, as you can see, uniform. Every house looks the same. My father used to do up, we called it do up. It was like retrofit. My father kind of retrofitted houses, and when he retrofitted houses, we lived in the house that he was retrofitting, and we kept moving. So we moved every 2 years. These are just some of the streets that I lived on. There's Russell Street, River Street, Royal Crescent, Prospect Place, Miles Buildings, Marlborough Buildings. I'm not going to complain. These are lovely streets. However, you can see how uniform they are. So when I came to LA and I saw this, I thought, that's fantastic. And I had grown up with a father who he himself loved architecture. I owe my interest in architecture to him. And he was desperate to sort of have fun with buildings. And what you can't see is that on the inside of these buildings, he actually did really sort of quite fun interiors, but there was absolutely no way you could do anything on the exterior, because these buildings were preserved within an inch of their lives, and it was absolutely verboten to do anything that would sort of impair the exterior. And my father loved the Bauhaus. He loved modernism. He loved to have ripped away the stone and like put in a great big glass window and let in the air from the outside, very California style. But of course he couldn't do that. So anyway, I was my father's daughter, and I grew up. I felt the desire, for more, I guess, self-expression. And then I went to LA and I saw what I just showed you. And then I moved here, and then time moved on, and then this sort of tremendous period of innovation then spilled into this moment of the digital revolution, where we enter this era where now we can make designs using all these digital tools, and it builds on all the creativity that I've just experienced. And some of these buildings, this is obviously the Disney Concert Hall, then this gets into design. Here's our April Greiman's wonderful stamp. In case any of you do not know how seminal an influence April Greiman was, she was a huge influence through her she was totally a radical in terms of graphic design. So this is not one of her earliest designs, but I popped it in just because it was of that period. And as she just told me now, she was the first woman to design a stamp for the US Postal Service. Commemorative stamp. So anyway, I put that in just as to honour April.
Women's voting rights.
Women's voting rights. So anyway, but as we're in this period of this surge of excitement about design, and then there's all these design magazines that come on the scene, and there's Dwell, and there's Wallpaper, and on it goes, and all the lifestyle publications, and everybody's pushing for kind of just like keep improving your environments, keep making new stuff. And all of this is also coinciding with the huge technological explosion happening in Silicon Valley, the opening of new markets to both fabricate and also buy stuff. So it's in a moment of sort of huge abundance, and we start learning terms like, one needs to sort of constantly upgrade. Nothing can stay still. We have to sort of keep on adding. So we love our iPhones, but to have one that's 18 months old makes you look like an absolute square dinosaur. And what all of this leads to is mountains of stuff. And we are now in a moment of having to sort of reckon with all this stuff that we're creating. And back to the show Wasted that I worked on, I met through my friend Julie here, she introduced me to this man, Richard Lute, Director of Environmental Affairs at Interior Removal Specialist. He is when you do TI on an interior, he's the guy that goes in and basically tries to persuade you as the client to not throw away all the office chairs that have only been there for 6 months. So anyway, he gave me this great quote: your whole life you're told you buy it, you use it, you throw it away. And he says there is no such thing as a way. So well, whatever we produce, whatever we put into the trash, just goes somewhere, and that is usually, or is often the landfill, or it's into a pile of plastic in the ocean, or it's into a animal's mouth, or it's into rivers, or whatever. And what that led to has spawned what we all now are very familiar with, which is a huge movement in sustainability. And out of that has come, lots and lots of innovation in sustainability. We can see it in technology, we can see it in cars, we can see it in Tesla, we can see it, solar panels being added to houses, new policies trying to deal with this crisis we have, almost to the point that we're getting, frankly, into a little bit of a kind of arms race within being more sustainable than the next person. And then that sometimes can create sort of, in a way, contradictions. So, as I'm the very month that I'm meeting these students who are telling me their worries about becoming designers, that very same month I get a pitch, for example, from a design firm that has built a 13,000 square foot house. Speculative is speculative. It means it didn't even really need to be there. It was purely speculative. 13,000 square foot, and it's going to be the first carbon neutral luxury estate in Malibu. Everything about that phrase sort of feels vaguely contradictory, is all I can say. Let's just leave it there. There's going to be lots of recycled steel and recycled lumber and forest certified and this and this and this and this. However, one did have to wonder, did this thing even need to exist? And can you really claim to in any way be environmental when you're a house that's 13,000 square foot in the urban wildlife interface? So there was a lot of questions attached to this house, and what that got me thinking was this doesn't necessarily ring true as an effective solution to what we're dealing with in terms of the amount of stuff we've created. So it so happens that also that same time, early last year, the 2021 Pritzker Prize is announced. And that's a prize, I'm sure you're all familiar with it, it goes to an architect somewhere globally who is definitely innovative with form and structure. Typically that architect builds new buildings. This year's Pritzker winner is Diovedo Francis Carré. He does beautiful work, beautiful. It's so wonderful that he's won the prize. He himself is innovating with form and colour. Last year's Pritzker was a very, very interesting selection. The jury picked a Parisian firm called Lacaton and Vassal. And Lacaton and Vassal are, they're a couple in life and work, and they basically, in their words, believe demolition is violence. Demolition is violence. And what they have done is, wherever possible, with whatever commission they are given, they try not to demolish what's there, they try to reuse what's there. Now, oftentimes, the problem they're given is improving public housing, of which there's a fair amount in France, and if you look at the example on the left, that was the original building, Tour Bois-le-Pretre in Paris. It was very run down, it had all sorts of problems. The city said tear it down, and they said no, we promise we can make this better for the residents, and we can save money, and we can conserve energy, and we can do all sorts of things by not tearing it down. So what you see on the right is the solution they came up with. When I interviewed the architect, what he told me, interestingly to all of us in LA, is that he put this kind of he and Anne Lacaton, they create these kind of exoskeletons that they sort of clamp onto the side of the building, and they bring in lots of glass and lots of light. They did the same with a building also in Bordeaux. You can see now what that's like for the resident. You see the building on the left is the existing, and then the building on the right is the same building that they've sort of extended out they've added on this framework on the outside. They've added this outdoor wonderful terrace. They've really made the place rather lovely to live in. And I just want you to know, so we can all feel proud of it, that their inspiration is actually LA's case study housing. He told me that they've always loved the idea of the indoor-outdoor experience and the lightness, just the lightness of the structure of case study. And that's what they were trying to do with these buildings. He said we wanted to sort of take Case Study House 21 and kind of stack it and make a tower of Case Study Houses 21. But anyway, so they got this prize, and it sent a signal. It sent a signal that, to me at least, the signal that I took away from it was, one, the Pritzker jury was definitely valuing sustainability, but it was also acknowledging that the Pritzker winner does do innovative architecture. They don't just sort of preserve to make something look exactly the way it did. They really do something that's sort of formally expressive and interesting, and in a way but at the same time they're sort of stepping back from this need to be sort of purely innovative for its own sake. So that's hence I'm calling this a radical retrofit. It is a retrofit, it is an adaptive reuse, but it's done with such a verve, and it's created a whole new environment to live in. So anyway, where that takes me back to is thinking about what's going on in LA. And actually in LA, we've got some pretty great stuff going on in preservation. We have in our own, the neighbourhood that we're in right now, the Arts District. The Arts District is obviously part of downtown LA, and downtown LA was really transformed by this policy change called the Adaptive Reuse Ordinance, which passed in 1999, and basically said people could go in and they could adaptively reuse commercial buildings, and they didn't have to provide new parking. And what it meant was we salvaged a huge amount of historic buildings, and we created a whole new life in downtown that you all now part of. Some of you may not be aware of how different downtown felt even 20 years ago. And that's because of this policy that put forward preservation as a goal. Now, what it wasn't doing at the time, or most people attached to this idea was doing, but most people at the time were not talking so much about sustainability. They were talking more about preservation and sort of the practicalities of reuse. But now, what the Pritzker win signalled, as I say, is that you could have this convergence. You could have sustainability and preservation and innovation, and it could all be enwrapped and enmeshed in one building. And I spoke to people within these worlds of preservation and sustainability who were very, very intrigued by that choice, especially because to date, there has not necessarily always been a kind of common ground or people moving in sync together with this sort of attitude of bringing the three in synergy. There's been a very strong preservation movement which has often tended to emphasise the buildings we love, either because they're culturally important or they're architecturally important, and we want to keep them sort of more or less as they were, so we hold on to these treasures. And it's been an effective movement. And then there's been the sustainability movement, which has been obviously advocating for all the ways in which one can make a building net zero, and all the ways in which one can be sustainable. And then, as I say, there's been this other sort of school, which is designers, like you, who stand on the shoulders of past designers who want to innovate, want to self-express. It's a very natural thing. And so anyway, again, I just found the Pritzker Prize of last year so interesting for what it signalled. So, just quickly to show a few things that are in LA, and what I'm going to show you is absolutely not definitive. You could take what I've said tonight and you could go out and you could just look around you and you can look at all the buildings that have been adaptively reused, some of them more sort of radically than others, but you'll see this whole area has been so transformed through this approach. And then we're starting to see more of it across the city, and we are starting to hear more, I guess, just a bit more of this conversation about how municipalities have to kind of make this a priority. So anyway, the adaptive reuse, just a couple of snaps. Eastern Columbia Lofts, building, just one of the buildings that was a beneficiary of the adaptive reuse ordinance, and now just recently we have the Apple Store on Broadway, which was the Old Tower Theatre, an absolutely remarkable. It's not just a retrofit. This was preservation plus rebuilding things that had been kind of messed up over time, and they did an amazing job. And Victor Gruen Associates and Norman Foster did this, and it's so perfect. I will say, it doesn't fit into my little category of radical retrofits. It's in some ways, it's a retrofit and it's marvellous. But in some ways, I'm more excited by the more rad retrofits. So I'm just dropping in a couple. So one of them is Second Home, which is a co-working space over in Hollywood, where the owners of the company, they bought a Paul Williams building that was in very poor shape, and they've adaptively reused it, but they have sort of created a courtyard in the middle, and they've added gardens, and then they put these pods outside that are in what was the parking space. And I just love the combination of new and old. I found that to be very exciting, and what you see on the right is pathways that go through the pods, and then the pods, and it's all kind of fun. This is Gary now with the yoga centre in Inglewood, which was an old bank. He dropped the floor and the ceiling in what was the old banking room, and now you have young people playing. It's very inspiring. It doesn't always have to be architectural. Sometimes you can just get out some pots of paint. St. Elmo Village, you should all know about St. Elmo Village, founded in the early 70s by two artists, uncle and his nephew, Roselle and Roderick Sykes, and they were living in these kind of, they were stables actually. I think it was Mary Pickford had kept her horses here. So there were stables, and there was these little bungalows, and they moved in and they wound up acquiring all the land, and then they just did this extraordinary colour scheme. They painted everything. Everything's the touch of the human hand. It's completely different from the guys in Paris, lacquered on a facade. It's not case study houses piled on top of each other, but it's totally a radical retrofit, and it's absolutely fantastic. And Patrice Cullis, who founded or co-founded Black Lives Matter, she actually lived there for a while, which is why the Black Lives Matter sign is on there, and they have lots of meetings there. This is back to April. April and Michael purchased a spa in Desert Hot Springs. I couldn't find the before pictures. I wanted the before. But anyway, they did a beautiful job, which is a mixture of architectural intervention and colour intervention on a spa in Desert Hot Springs, and it's a dreamy place that I've had the good fortune to go to over the years. This is not yet built, but this hopefully will be built. It's just the Bebop Centre in Riverside. It's Black and people of. I'm so sorry, I'm forgetting what the acronym is, but it's for economic opportunities for Black and brown people. That's what the B's stand for, and the designers are proposing to take this pretty crummy building at this crossroads and turn it into what you see, and it just shows how you can do stuff that's really fun. I will say that sometimes the paint jobs, I just popped this in here because it was round the corner, and I guess we've got a building that's 10 years old or just over, and it's getting a retrofit already. And the retrofit, Michael Molson, who's an architect many of us are very familiar with, sadly was not consulted because the retrofit is sort of rather extreme, and not quite sure the success of this one. But anyway, point being, colour can make a lot of impact. The one on the left was Michael's original, the one on the right is how it's looking now. Some of you might even live there. Tell me, which colour scheme do you enjoy living in? Sometimes retrofits, sometimes retrofits can get people kind of mad. There's nothing that got people madder in LA than the Peterson Museum, the wrapping of the Peterson Museum. And what you see there is the top image was the original department store. that was there, and about mid-century. And then we have Peterson's first retrofit, which was about 20 or so years ago. And then there's the next retrofit by KPF, and this is definitely one of those things that you're not allowed to admit that you actually like, but but I think this is fun. And then we come to the Academy Museum, and the Academy Museum did a pretty smart thing. They kept the May Company building, which at a certain time there was a whole discussion about tearing down, and the preservationists in LA fought to save it. So they came in, and John Fiedler, who's quite a renowned historic, consultant on historic buildings, he perfectly he preserved and then also again recreated parts missing from the May Company. And then Renzo Piano comes in and adds the sphere on the back and gouges out this lobby in the May Company building to make way for staircases and galleries. And now, of course, this massive hulking lump of concrete is itself going to generate some carbon emissions, and it's not sort of completely sustainable. But they did all these calculations as they did this project, and they figured out that by doing this mixture of the modifying of the existing building plus adding on just one structure rather than like building a complete new structure, that they wound up saving, doing something that was ultimately much more sustainable than had they torn down May Company and started again. Now, on the other hand, just a few yards away, we have the Bing Theatre here in the middle of demolition in 2020. 4 buildings have been torn down to make way for Peter Zumthor's new museum. Now, I am absolutely a fan of contemporary architecture. I think Peter Zumthor's really incredibly talented. However, I don't fully understand the logic of this, especially as Peter Zumthor himself has a track record in doing really remarkable, radical retrofits, like the Colombo Museum in Cologne, where he took this ancient ruins of a building and inserted this new building. And this is one that he's had tremendous renown for. And I do think it's unfortunate that if Peter was the chosen architect for this project, could we not have had a discussion about a really smart retrofit? So, anyway, where does this all leave me? I told you that at the start of this conversation that one of the things that happens when you get old is you kind of start to reflect and you start to look for, I guess, meaning in things that have happened in your life and find pathways and threads and stuff. And so I was sort of thinking, why am I caring? Why is this sort of mattering to me so much now when I came to LA back in the 80s and the early 90s, and I was so thrilled by the innovation that was the counterpoint to the regular row houses that I've grown up in Bath. And I realised that all those buildings I love, that house, Edgemar, not Kentucky, actually, let's not mention Kentucky in this context, and then Michael's Regis House, they were all radical retrofits. They were all based on existing buildings, and the architect came in and said, no, let's have fun with this. We'll keep the building, but we'll also do this with this insertion that's going to give it a whole new meaning and is going to project it forward into the future. And I realised that that was partly what I had appreciated about those buildings, but I didn't fully realise it at the time. And it took me back to my childhood in Bath, where I had, accompanied my father as he worked on these retrofits of these Georgian houses, and we didn't take photos all the time at that point, so I really don't have any photos of any of his interiors, unfortunately, but they were always bold. There was always some crazy colour or amazingly florid wallpaper or the latest sort of furniture that would sit then by a Georgian fireplace. And I realised that he too was doing his own version of the radical retrofit, albeit it was circumscribed by being within this Georgian house. But anyway, I realised that sort of all through my life this had been something that I really appreciated. So anyway, with that, I'm sort of drawing to a close. I forgot to set my timer. Oh, I think we're in good time. I'm going to finish with Heather Mosen. She's one of the students that I spoke with when I was doing that series. And this is, I forgot to mention that Heather told me that when she was a really good student, and when she came to do her thesis project, she told her teachers she didn't want to build anything. She just wanted to design nothing. She said, there's too much. We've got to stop. We've got enough buildings. Can we just build nothing? Well, of course, they laughed at her and said, you're in an architecture school. You can't build nothing. So she wound up doing a very, very intriguing project having to do with a nuclear waste in it. She was going to have it decompose over centuries and it would finally disappear. But anyway, she was very thoughtful about it. But this, I'm just going to go out on what she says. And in the first sentence we've got the word building, but I think we can apply that to other media, furniture, all sorts of media within the arts, fashion, etc., etc. And she says, when it comes to building, we all too often opt for the easiest possible way, which is flattening whatever is there and starting again. Creating something amazing from a blank surface is less innovative to me than creating it from what you have. So that's my talk about retrofits. Question.
At least. Where did Heba graduate from?
She graduated from the Bartlett. And the reason why I wound up talking to her was because in the course of doing the series Wasted, I spoke to a woman who was doing this amazing project to do with e-waste. And somehow, I can't quite remember how that all wound up happening, but the Bartlett reached out and they wanted to know more about the e-waste stuff that this lady, Julia Christensen, was working on. And this wound up then feeding into, I did a lot of research for that Wasted series, and this wound up as part of the, I did an online conversation with a bunch of students over there. So, but that's interesting that you asked, because the thing was, I was getting this from students everywhere. This was not exclusive to the UK by any stretch. I spoke to a lot of students here.
They want to be part of the solution, not creating more of the problem.
Yeah, no, it was really striking. It was really striking how much of that feeling I came away with, and this feeling that now they're educated so intensively about the life cycle of products, and they do all the life cycle analysis, and they look at sort of cradle to grave and cradle to cradle, and they look at the cycle, and the deeper they go, the more they find out that there is no such thing as a way, and that nothing is what's the word I'm looking for? Julie, help me out here. What's the word? Nothing can be fully sustainable. There's always something.
True, but there's a circularity aspect.
And the circularity. They study the circularity, and they kept coming up against roadblocks. They couldn't fully complete the circle. So, but anyway, as I did say, not every student expressed that level of despondency, but quite a few did. Yeah.
First, a quick comment and then my question. I think when you come back to deliver another talk here, we'd like to see photos of the inside of the building. Dad,
That's the thing.
We did, what was it?
We just said did up.
Did up.
We'd say did up. He did up buildings.
Would love to see those. But my question really is, yes, back in the 80s and 90s, we kept hearing that, oh, it's cheaper to tear down than it is to retrofit these buildings and bring them up to code. Was that just BS, or has there been kind of some progression in the building industry that has made it more? I mean, we understand that it's better, but can we do away with that whole argument that it's cheaper to tear down? Is that absolutely now gone, and we know that retrofitting is both economical and sustainable?
Well, I did wind up doing this story for not a story, a report for Sierra Magazine about this exact thing, and I did do more research for that. It was sort of building on the wasted series. And actually, even though, because we've done so well with adaptive reuse, it appears like we're doing a lot of this, nationally, we're not doing as much of it as people advocating for it would like to see. And what you'll come up against is actually still the cost argument. There's still the cost argument. There's things like, if a building in LA is unreinforced masonry, that becomes a problem. If there's earthquake retrofits that have to be done, that becomes a problem. If you're changing a building that's, you're changing a deep plan office building into housing, how to bring in the light, and then that becomes a problem. And then there's obviously the financial, the banks and the mortgage lenders definitely incentivize new construction still. And in fact, one of the people that I interviewed for that, he said, if we believed that this was a real value, we would figure out ways to financially incentivize more of it. And there isn't. We don't incentivize enough of it. And the various professions attached to the construction industry have tended for a variety of reasons to sort of support the new, And again, that's why I thought the Pritzker Prize last year was such a resounding kind of call to action, a quiet call to action. And again, it took me back to that decade where I realised that buildings like the Regis House that Michael worked on and Frank's buildings, they were ultimately, I don't think they were using the language of sustainability. Were you using the language of sustainability?
Actually, we were, because 75% of all the steel in that building was recycled.
So you were, in addition to the fact that you were intervening in a building that was already there?
Yeah, the people that own that property and the house were what I call industrial recyclers. They bought, among other things, all of the excess steel of the high-rise buildings from the 1980s in downtown Los Angeles. And they stored it on their adjoining properties. And so when they asked them to do the house, basically turn that into their private residence, I knew all of the materials that were in all over the 20 acres. And I said, I'm interested in reusing all the material that you have. And they were excited because they didn't know what to do with it. They thought they were going to sell it for scrap.
Right.
So recycle all of that. The question I have for you is Frank's house, that house, and a number of other ones that you're attracted to. One of the objectives, which is kind of it's sort of unspoken objective, is to keep the integrity of both pieces, the new piece and the old piece. The difference could be that you transform it to such an extent you don't really see the old piece,
Right.
except it sets parameters and limits on whatever you do. I always imagined being born and raised in LA and being a place for attractive people from all over the world. The aesthetic model was also a social model. How do you have two things become one thing and keep the integrity of both? So in the end, 1 + 1 = 1, plus both pieces are better.
Right.
And so I don't know what the question is. The question is, I guess, what your thoughts are on merging things, whether
Well, I love the dynamic tension.
yeah.
I mean, and I agree with you, that is the challenge. And I mean, because I do think, I did do an interview with Peter Zumthor when the Zumthor project was first proposed. And I don't think any of us that sort of love architecture would say that the 4 existing buildings at LACMA were the greatest buildings in Los Angeles and we should preserve them for their intrinsic architectural merits. I don't think we would, but nonetheless, there were other merits, which was simply memory and the fact of people who grew up here going to those buildings for decades. And I did say to Peter, I said, you know, because he wanted to just sort of rip the whole lot down, and I said, what about memory? You know, what about the fact that Angelinos have been coming here since childhood? And this has been taped, I better make sure I get my quotes correct, but my recollection was, he said this was ridiculous, like this is ridiculous. And then proceeded to tell me about his mother, who lived in a small town in Switzerland and looked out the window on a bell tower, or church tower. The bell tower was no longer really relevant to people's lives because nobody was going to church anymore. But he said, my mother likes the bell tower, and this is sort of ridiculous. And again, I might be slightly fudging exactly what he said, but he very distinctly seemed to be suggesting that memory was not really relevant. Now, he himself had shown the opposite with the building in Köln, which was an amazing collision of old and new. And I do regret what's happened with LACMA, because I do think that it just would have been so fascinating. I wish there'd been a competition where architects had been invited to come in and say, here's the 4 buildings, show us what you can do with this, and make it something new. And that would have been so interesting and creative, and that's why I agree with Heather.
It's more complex design.
It's a more complex, it's more of a challenge.
In order
It's
to
too
do it
easy.
hybrid,
Yes.
is something that I think is anathema to Swiss. You can't do hybrid in Switzerland.
Well, no, but he did do hybrid in Köln when he got over the border.
It was kind of overpowering what he did.
Oh, okay.
It overpowered.
So you mean it crushed the Roman ruins?
Yeah, it's like you have to keep the facade, and that's what the
Right.
Romans do.
Right.
I mean, I think the enemy is not other modern architects, other contemporary architects. I always find it curious that good architects attack other good architects. I think it has more to do with the jealousy they didn't get commission. You know? But the fact is, I think it was really a missed opportunity. It would have been more surprising to convert, to repurpose the existing building.
And when I asked Michael Govan about that, and it was definitely repeated in many articles, he would say there's the asbestos and there's the leaks and there's the this and the that, and when you dealt with all of that, you end up spending as much money as you would on a new building. And I wasn't the value engineer, but I think people with more expertise than I would argue that it probably would have ended up costing less than a whole new structure. And you know, and again, I really do want to underscore, I'm not a sort of retrograde or nostalgic. When I was growing up in a historic city that's very existence was to have people come and look at its history, I was jonesing, antsy for more sort of, you know, self-expression. I was incredulous when I came to LA and saw that every house looked different. You know, people expressed their personality on their houses. I was really sort of excited by that. But right now, obviously, we are just wading through, you know, just absolutely horrendous levels of waste, and really that we can dynamically, you know, combine the old and the new. And I would say it's true for any of you in this room that are not architects, but you might go into interior design or furniture design. I mean, there's wonderful stuff you can do with furniture. In fact, I remember meeting, so Martin Lawrence Bullard is an interior designer in LA. He's quite successful. And several years ago, he did a house, sorry, not a room, it's like a massive house. But he just did the interiors. He didn't build the 15,000 square foot house. But anyway, he did the interiors. It was for the really funny guys, the Wayans, one of the Wayans. He did the house for one of the Wayans brothers. And I guess he just filled it up with repurposed antique furniture. And I guess this was when the whole conversation about sustainability was sort of starting to percolate up, and it was becoming more of a national conversation, and the USGBC was being founded. It was that kind of point in time. And Martin said, and again, forgive me if I'm mangling his quote, but he said, you know, I'm the one that's sustainable. I'm doing the sustainable work because I am purchasing antique furniture, and I am creating new heirlooms. I am reupholstering, and I'm repolishing chairs, and I'm doing this and doing that. And it was a provocation. And when I see when I learned from Richard Lute, the sheer, just grotesque volume of office furniture that gets thrown out after a firm has stayed in a unit for a year, you know, and it all ends up in the landfill. It's like, no, this doesn't. Can't you put your bottom down on a chair that someone had their bottom on, someone else had their bottom on last year? Like, why do you need to throw out all the chairs? So anyway, forgive me, I don't mean to sound like an old rant, but we do have to think about this stuff.
Thank you so much for super fascinating and provocative talk. I'm wondering what role in your thinking globalization plays to address that, especially with the waste projects, because so much e-waste was imported to China, so much waste has, until very recently, been imported to China, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and of course fast fashion, much of this material is made there and transferred back, and then more recently we've seen pandemic slowdowns and other rising geopolitical tensions are kind of, building up at the ports of all these materials. So do you address that, I guess, in your larger thinking? And also, do you feel like for the retrofits, we also need to, and this is a good example that you just gave about thinking about repurposed antiques, because the materials themselves, they're added onto the building, and those are coming from abroad. Doesn't that continue to?
It's a huge issue. Completely, you're absolutely right. I think I spent like one sentence on it in this presentation. I did say that the sort of the surge of kind of excitement about design and this idea of democratic design coincided with the opening up of these new labour markets, as well as new markets for stuff. Absolutely. So IKEA, which on the one hand is imbued with Swedish values, about design, on the other hand, has people in Vietnam making furniture that will be thrown away just like fast fashion is, shipped over the seas, choking the oceans with crap coming out of the storage container ships, and on and on and on and on it goes. And now, I didn't put into the presentation, but I did find IKEA's kind of new cycle of life, and they're still saying democratic design, and then they've now got these, I think, 5 points of democratic design, and one of those points is sustainability. It's not make stuff close to home. It's figure out somehow, because I have been reading about IKEA. I mean, I don't think they're yet ready to sort of regionalise their production. I mean, it's a huge issue, and in fact, I forgot to mention that one of the other contributors to this sort of explosion in design consumption, which has been great for people in the design industry, but one of the contributors, of course, is social media and magazines and TV shows and HGTV and the rise of all of that then gets people salivating over marble from Italy and creating this market that I think there's always been somewhat of a globalized market in design for people with money. This is where the paradox of democratization. The paradox of democratizing design is that now we just create just enormous amounts of stuff that everybody's buying from everywhere. And in fact, that's right. Okay, just to answer this. Or to answer it a little bit. So I guess I did a segment on DNA when I was still doing that every week. I did a segment on the new Porsche car enthusiasts in this room. The electric Porsche. What's the all-electric Porsche? The Katon. Katon. With rotor. Yes. Taycan. That's right. Thank you. So anyway, I did a segment on the new Taycan, and I said to this Porsche enthusiast, I said, "What do you think? Are you gonna be able to trade in your Porsche that makes lots of noise and spews out gas emissions and drive this electric car," which, by the way, sort of had to add in some noise effects, so it sounds like a Porsche. But anyway, he said, sure about that, because he said, actually, what people need to understand about Porsche enthusiasts is they hold on to their cars for years. And they get their Porsche that they bought in the late 60s and they've still got it. And he said, I think, I would contend that that is more sustainable than buying the new all-electric Porsche Taycan that you then change the parts every 6 months. So anyway, like the Porsche students that I spoke with came up against over and over again was you think you're doing something that you think you're completing the circle and you come up against an obstacle, you know. So, but yeah, the globalization is a big issue in the pandemic. I mean, I think many of us during the pandemic, well, there was much that the pandemic made us think about. And one of the things it made us think about was there was a kind of contraction. There was a contraction, and it's, I don't know. I know people's livelihoods were impacted, but it felt like perhaps we needed a contraction.
The thing about IKEA, there's, you know, it's cheap.
That's the thing. It's
And
cheap.
it doesn't, in a year, you could buy a great looking couch, and in a year, you literally have to throw it away because there is no padding in it anymore, or some part breaks.
Right.
It's you know, it's a kind of a bad, vicious cycle of that. You know, like you get that design, and it's nice looking and nice color, but it's designed for immediate obsolescence. You know,
Immediate obsolescence. I mean, back in the 50s when the term kind of came into circulation, when cars were being designed to be restyled and get the new style every year. No, it's gone to a whole mad level of obsolescence. And then, of course, what Martin Lawrence Bullard would say, you know, who repurposes the vintage chairs and antique, not just vintage, because vintage tends to evoke sort of mid-century or something, but he would get the antiques. And what he would say is, and so would the guy that owns the Porsche, the old Porsche, they would say, better to pay more for something you hold on to for 50 years than pay less for something you throw out. But then you contend with the impulse that we all have to change things with every season, you know, and to not want to hold on to things for 50 years.
that's fashion.
That's fashion. So,
Well, that also brings in the equity issue. You can afford that.
Yeah.
That really.
well,
Yeah,
well,
you can
except
afford that
remember
Porsche, you know.
remember before, no, but of course you can't afford to write a check for a Porsche, no. Maybe there, but however, I do think there's certain things like a really good winter coat that costs more than, way more than a really shoddily made winter coat that you replace with next year's winter coat. They used to do something called layaway, remember? You couldn't necessarily buy the thing right away, so you'd lay it away and you'd pay off a little bit each month. And then you get your good winter coat that you then held on to for 60 years.
I bought my first Alto stool on layaway in design research in Boston or Cambridge, and it took me like a year.
Right, and then you
When I came out
do you
of
still
school.
have it?
No.
But
It didn't make the move from New York out to
Yeah.
LA because somebody painted it while I was on vacation and ruined it. So, but it would have. I mean, structurally, everything about it was. It's somewhere. You know, it didn't get thrown away.
Yeah, and did you feel like the delaying the gratification had been worth it?
Oh, totally. I was like, I wouldn't even let anybody sit on it or near it. And I was like, hey, you know, and I love that thing. You know, and IKEA's done a great job, except the stuff is crap, like knocking it off. Like they put 4 legs on it rather than 3, right? They did their own version of it. Nobody knows the difference, but, you know, it's just, and then, you know, because it's 4 legs, it's structurally dumb, and so they get rickety and stuff. You know?
Yeah.
And the original had 3 legs.
Well, that's the other thing that we as I guess collectively as a profession have contributed to, which is this idea for good and bad, this idea of sort of good taste and how great it is for everybody to be able to buy a piece of good taste. The implication being that whatever they had before was bad taste, and we're kind of improving their lives with good taste. And up to a point, a well-designed house with beautiful light, and you know, something that's really considered, obviously is better, it absolutely is. But IKEA was, and Habitat and Design Within Reach, they are sort of predicated on a notion of stuff that you have if you want to be sort of seen as someone with good taste versus the stuff you don't. And I had a really interesting conversation with Prophet Walker. Now, Prophet Walker's a developer in LA who built Treehouse, which is the co-living ground-up building. But it was very interesting what he tried to do with a ground-up building, which is he brought in a brilliantly talented designer called Sean Knibb. Some of you might know of his work. He's a landscape designer, he's an interior designer, he's an everything designer. He's very, very talented. Anyway, he brought in Sean Knibb to be his creative director. And what he asked Sean to create was he wanted Sean to create the feeling of a whole load of people, it's a co-living place, a whole load of people, 40 people, whatever, who've all gone to other countries. They come from different places, they've travelled, they've picked up stuff on their travels, and it's all found its way into this place. And then he overlaid on that, he wanted we all heard of the Danish concept of hygge, which was fashionable for a while. Do you remember hygge? It was very fashionable about 3 years ago. And
Which
hygge
means
was
comfort or something, right?
But yes, it's a kind of a Scandinavian idea of comfort.
I thought it was hygge.
Hygge, is that how you say it?
Hygge.
Thank you. Anyway, so he wanted, and his idea of hygge, Prophet's idea of hygge, was having gone to his grandparents as a child and walked into their house and nothing matched. And there was photos of the family all over the place, and everything was a bit of a hodgepodge, but in a way that he found completely filled with hygge. And so he gave Sean this completely fascinating charge of get that feeling for me, create that feeling, which is basically the feeling of being in a place that isn't composed, isn't contrived, it's just sort of come about organically with stuff being added to the wall over the years. And then also give me that feeling of people who've brought something from all their travels. Sean did an incredible job. I mean, the place feels great, and it does. But it also sort of, it's impossible to make something feel like it was just thrown together when it clearly wasn't. But he's done.
It also means cozy.
It means cozy.
Comfortable, cozy, kind of.
And Prophet's idea of cozy, based on his grandparents, was that it was not overly kind of good taste, that it was just their stuff.
Yeah.
It was their stuff, and that's what made it feel cozy. Time. 8:15.
No,
There we go.
it's way beyond that.
Oh yeah, it's
You're on UK time. So yeah.
no, it's 8:23.
Okay.
10 minutes longer. Well, anyway, thank you everybody.